when you're building that business case for the job description for a new Martech tool and you're trying to assign a KPI to it, because eventually you're going to get asked that question. All right, you want to buy a lead routing tool or you want to buy a reverse ETL tool. What is the ROI of that? And sometimes, you can kind of like piece it together and estimate like what that ROI might be, but you don't have hard data all the time. Like, what are some tactics that you've gone around that when you were faced?
Yeah, you're right. It is a lot trickier and tougher to measure the ROI of MarTech. It's easier said than done. And I think that's why oftentimes, especially MarTech that you've had as part of your tech stack for like 5 years or 10 years, no one is looking at those. No one is questioning those anymore. Whereas I think newer MarTech, you're a little bit more on top of. Um, but I think there's always sort of proxy metrics that you can start to lean into as early as day one or week one or month one. And so I usually like to start with the very like basic adoption metrics, I would say, in the first 30 days. And 30 days is like a very like generalized statement. When you have a much more like robust technology, then obviously 30 days might not be sufficient to measure even like adoption. But whatever that right threshold is, timeline, I think adoption is a good way to start getting a directional sense of, one, is your team using it, which tells me like, are they finding it useful? Is this like somewhat useful? And then once you have a good, grasp on like, okay, it's, successfully it's onboarded, people are using it, the people are activated on it, then you can start to kind of move to, I would say, like some of the more performance-based metrics. And those also become pretty hard to measure, I would say. But ultimately, you want to use a metric that you're going to be able to say, are we better off because of it? And that's a very like blanket, vague statement, but better for you could be number of campaigns that you're shipping in a given month. Is it going from like 10 to 30? Is it going from 10 to 12? Is it just going from 10 to 10 and there's really no change as of yet? And then investigating, okay, why is there no change? Is it because, it's still taking time, your cycles are longer, your reporting cycles are longer, whatever that looks like? Or is it truly because this isn't actually moving the needle, and continuing to collect that data every month? And I would say by month 6, again, loose timeline differs heavily from, technology to technology. But by month 6, you should start to have a more stronger opinion on the prospects of this tool. And I think, the biggest mistake I see is, waiting until the end of your contract to then make that evaluation at
Mm.
that time. So when the account executive reaches out to you and say, "Hey, let's renew your contract," and you're like, "Oh, okay, I guess, yeah, we'll look into it and we'll see." And you don't have the insights to make an informed decision. And we know how busy every marketing team is, and you kind of make that decision really quickly and say, "Okay, cool, we'll just renew for another year and then we'll kind of see how it plays out." But instead, you can go in from like month 6 to 12, you're already racking a lot of data and insight and have a real pulse to say, okay, this has actually moved the needle on the problem that we're trying to solve, and then be able to have a more productive conversation with the account executive to discuss the whys and the why nots.
Yeah, such a great answer. I love the point about having milestones with key dates when you're implementing a new tool, and you tie those milestones to the use cases that you originally got approval to purchase that thing in the first place. Like there was an ROI picture that you painted to get approval for it in the first place, and that was tied to use cases and what are we actually going to do with this thing? Send more campaigns or send less campaigns sometimes and better campaigns, more optimized. So sometimes like a segmentation angle or more
Yes.
personalization there. And so you would tie those milestones to those use cases. We said we were going to buy this tool to do X and Y. By month 6, we're going to have all of our data fully integrated from the warehouse in there. And by like month 8, we're going to be sending out at least 3 optimized campaigns post acquisition, blah, blah, blah. And so, like, at least you're able to show we purchased this tool. We said we were going to buy it to do X, Y, and Z. Here's proof that we hit these milestones to do X, Y, and Z. And now we're reporting on whether those things are actually like driving revenue or not. But that's a whole other
Exactly.
conversation.
And it's
Um,
it's also like it's tough because oftentimes you're using that type of a technology for the first time. And so you
right.
don't necessarily have baselines to say, definitively at the time of scoping that you are gonna increase the quality or like receptibility or deliverability of your campaigns by X
Yeah,
percent. It's hard to say that. So you're
for
using kind of
sure.
industry benchmarks or benchmarks that maybe the vendor has provided you with to set those baselines. And so you have to have a little bit of a flexibility in your KPI measurement to say, okay, you know what, we didn't get to this industry standard, but with this, the progress we've made, and we see this continuing to improve if we continue to invest or expand in this way. So you have to be a little bit flexible with your approach, not super rigid, but at the same time, having, I think, to your point, those milestones and those metrics along the way is really helpful.